Hi everybody, and welcome to this session about the guidelines for library services to prisoners. My name is Dr. Jane Garner and I work at Charles Sturt University in Australia as an academic teaching students to be librarians and archivists and record keepers. Unfortunately, I can't be with you today. I was really looking forward to coming up to Dublin from Australia to present this to you, but unfortunately I have COVID, so I'm not able to travel. And so I'm recording this for you, and I hope you enjoy learning about the work we've been doing on writing these guidelines. This is the document that we are basing our work on. This is the previous edition of the guidelines for library services to prisoners. This was published in 2005, so it is an old document and therefore requires some updating, but it's a really important document because it guides a lot of other documents, and I'll explain that to you. So, for example, this is the Australian version of the guidelines for library services to prisoners. And this is a document that is based on the IFLA document. And this is a really common situation where countries take this IFLA document that we've been working on and adapt it to their own needs that work for their country or their place in their country. So it's a very important document that acts as a core document or a template for other countries to then adapt. So it was really important for us to put some work into it and to bring it up to date from the 2005 version. So to do that, we put together a writing group or a working group. Many of these people here, they're all represented by an icon on their country to show you where they come from. Some of these people were part of the section for library services for people with special needs, and some of them weren't. Some of them are just contacts that some of us have got, and these are people who are experts in the area of libraries and prisons. So we came together, we met online through Zoom. We tried to find times that worked for all of us. Of course, the time zones made it very tricky, but we would often be very late at night in Australia and very early in the morning in the US, and the people through the rest of the world were sort of in the middle of their day. So we made it work. The first task we did, I'm just going to move my head so you can see this properly. The first task that we undertook was to find other existing guidelines about prison libraries from across the world. And these are the ones that we found. Some of them you can see are whole countries, and some of them are places within a country. And these are all the existing guidelines for library services to prisoners that we found. We wanted to find what was already out there to make sure that when we wrote our new document, we were covering all of the things that were included in each of these documents, and to make sure that the people's needs right across the world were all included in our new document. So within the group, we split these up into different people, took different countries or different regions. They read those guidelines, they picked out the best of them and added them to a list that became almost like a contents page, I suppose, for our new document, like a list of headings or sections that we felt were going to be very important for us to have. And sometimes we pulled a bit of the ideas that were covered in some of these documents as well, and made sure that those ideas were covered in our new document. So we went ahead and started to write using the structure that we'd found using other people's documents and the existing document that was there as well from 2005. We each took a section of an area within the document that we felt we had some expertise in and wrote that chapter. And so what people who had experience in running programs in prisons through prison libraries wrote the program section. People who have experience in managing libraries within prisons wrote the management section. Often it was a group effort. One or two authors would come together, 2 or 3 authors would come together, and they would write their section, and then they would send it through to me and I would collate the whole lot, and then I wrote it again from the top, making sure that the use of language was consistent, that it was all clear, that there was no conflicting ideas between, that there was sort of internal consistency within the document itself, and resolving problems along the way that often I would refer back to the group and say, we need to decide on this particular issue, and we would talk it through and come up with a solution together. So it was a really great process. Then we sent out this first draft. So you can see here all the orange dots are the existing writers, and the purple icons are the people that we then sent the first draft to for an expert review. So everybody who was in the writing group then got the whole document back, and then we sent it out to all these purple groups as well. And again, I'll move my head because you can see there was another Australian involved at that point. So as you can see with the writing group and the reviewing group, there is a gap in the coverage of, the geographic coverage of our workers. So we've got, like right through here, really, there's nobody working in that area, and also through this part of Europe and also north of Canada. So it could be that we just didn't know people from our networks didn't extend into those areas to then ask those people to help us with the writing and the reviewing. Or it could be that there just isn't a strong existence of libraries in the prisons in that region. I think, for example, I read that Japan doesn't have libraries in their prisons at all. So that would explain why we got no contributions from Japan. One thing I'd ask of you in the room today is if you have any contacts through these areas that we haven't got representation in, people that you think might have something to add to the document or to be able to review the document for us, that would be fantastic. So my contact details are at the end of this presentation, and it would be really great if you could get in touch and let me know if you have the name of a contact that could fill some of these geographic gaps for us. One of the big challenges that we had to work with writing this document was there's a huge diversity of environments. So prison libraries across the world differ enormously. The picture on the left here came from one of our colleagues in Africa, and this is a library in Australia. Now, the Australian one looks sort of neater and newer, but the collection is really, really poor. There's no attempt to meet the information needs of the users at all. These are just donations and things. There's often prison libraries are really tidy because the prisoners are in charge of them generally, and they have a lot of time to tidy their libraries. So they often look good, but often the collections aren't terrific. But what we wanted to do was to make this document applicable across the whole range of prison libraries, from those that are really just starting out, really very much in the development phase, right through to those that are much more solid and perhaps managed by real live library people rather than the prisoners who are just trying to do their best with what they've got. So the way that we went about trying to get the document to span all of those different types of libraries, from the very developing through to the very established, was we added a new section to the guidelines called the minimum standards for prison libraries. And so this is a list of things that says, if you can do nothing else, you need to do these very few things. This is the starting point, that this is where you need to work from. And it was really important to us to make sure that we weren't giving the impression that if you did all these things, then that's it, your job is done. Because a lot of people in our writing group wrote to us and said, well, if you just say that you can do this much, and even though it's a minimum, then there's no incentive for prison managers to expand it or to build on it. So we made the language very clear that this is a starting point. This is the bare minimum, rather than something that you feel that is a complete and developed library. So that was one way of dealing with that particular challenge of the diversity of library types. Another challenge we had was the use of language, and the document is written in English and it will be translated into other languages, as the 2005 version was as well. But within English itself, there was also a lot of discussion that was required about the use of particular words. We had a lot of feedback saying that the word prisoner was inappropriate or offensive or hurtful. And so then we looked at other words we could use, so things like inmate, or, we even looked at the possibility of using person first language and, person living in a prison or a prison library user, but it became unwieldy and too long. We felt we needed one word to represent who these libraries were for. And in the end, we went with the word prisoner because that was something that translated well. It was something that we felt carried the least offence, recognising that it does cause offence in some cases. There were other words that we needed to look at, like the use of jail versus correctional centre versus prison. There are, in some countries, those terms are interchangeable. In some countries, those terms mean completely different things. In Australia, for example, we don't call our prisons anymore. We don't call them jails anymore. We call them correctional facilities. That's their official title. But when you're talking about them with, the people who are living in them say they are prisoners living in jail. So the use of language isn't even consistent within one country. So what we did to get around this, we included a glossary of terms where we explained our use of some of these words that were potentially hurtful or disturbing to people. We explained why we used them and why we chose those words over others. And we've also used this as an opportunity to explain, what other words that we've used throughout the document and what they mean and how they can be used. So what we've got now is a final draft, and we've got a whole lot of new sections in there, which I'll take you through very quickly. But I just wanted to show you the table of contents. I'm not sure how much of this you can actually see, but we've got sections. There's a preface section where we talk about the purpose of the guidelines, the role of prison libraries. We look at some of the official documents that guide prison libraries, like some of the United Nations documents. We also then have a management section, which is all about managing the prison libraries, things about giving prisoners access, how many people should be working in a library, what the budgets should be, what the physical facilities should be. So all that sort of management content. Then there's a big section on collection management, which is looking at user needs analysis, different types of library materials, what to do with censorship and exclusion, donations, how to handle interlibrary loans, all sorts of stuff that relate to the collection. We've got a services and programs section, which was really nice. I really like this section. This has got a whole bunch of things in there about services and programs that prison libraries could offer that would be appropriate for them to offer, and some of the events and things that could be useful to library users. So I think that section will be a very useful section for people who are running prison libraries to come up with ideas about some of the services and programs that they could be offering. Then we've got a new section, which is, it's not a new section so much, but there's a lot of new content in there about specific user groups. We've got some general principles at the start, but then we've got a whole lot of other sections there. We've got ethnic, faith, and linguistic diversity. We've got low literacy levels. We've got people with disabilities. We've got youth, parents, older people, people living in segregation, all sorts of different user groups and how their needs might be addressed through a prison library. Then there's a section on information technology, and then we've got the glossary, and then there's the minimum standards, which we added at the end. We added it at the end, and that was one of the big decisions we had to make, was where do we put this minimum standards? If we put it on the end, does that give the impression that it's not very important? It's just something that we added in at the last minute. Maybe we should put it right at the top of the document to say that this is really important. But then the feedback came back that if we put it at the top of the document, then prison managers are likely to look at it and say, well, that's the important bit. That's all we need to do. and then never move beyond that part of the document. So we decided to put it at the end as a way of making it easily findable and also detachable. So if you print out the document and you're just working with the minimum standards, you can actually pull them off the back of the document, and you've got them as a handy starting point. So in terms of new sections, the specific user groups, we've got, as I said, ethnic, faith and linguistic diversity is a new section for us, as is low literacy levels, which is very common, unfortunately, in prisons. We have new sections for people with disabilities and special needs, and some of the content that should be included in a library collection to work with patrons with disabilities or special needs. We have a youth section, which is new. So this is a recognition that a lot of our countries incarcerate children for breaking the law, and a lot of those children are aged 10 and over, or even younger. So we felt it was important that the guidelines have some information in there about how a prison library should be working in a juvenile justice facility or in a children's prison. We added in a new section on gender and sexual identity, and I think this section was the most rewritten section. I think I rewrote this, these 4 points here, maybe 7 or 8 times, just to try and get the language right. And we got a lot of feedback from a lot of people who have expertise and experience in this area, and it was terrific to get their guidance in this section. We now have a section on parents, as a lot of particularly mothers have, pardon me, a chance to have their children in prison with them, sometimes up to like sort of school age, perhaps. There's also a section for working with elderly patrons, as a lot of our prisons now have a lot of old people or elderly people who have specific needs in their jails. So where we're up to now, I'm just going to have a quick sip because my COVID voice is cracking. This is what we're up to at the moment. The final draft has gone through to the IFLA review process, and we have this document back where we have some scores here about general things that they look for, and then there is a whole lot of edits that they've asked for. So my job, unfortunately, I was going to try and get this done so it was ready for you for today, but unfortunately I haven't been able to do that because I haven't been very well. But my next step is to work through this document, pick up all these edits and get it processed, ready to come back to them for their final sign off. So once that's done, the document will be available on the IFLA website, and we'll also be translating it into other languages. And if you would like to see a copy of the draft as it is now, then I'd be very happy to send it to you. If you have anything you'd like to add to it, it's not too late. We can certainly add in new things, particularly for people who are in those regions that we haven't been able to get representation from. So I'm going to stop. There's my contact details, so you can find me on Twitter and email, and I would love to hear from you. So thank you very much for your listening along, and I'm very sorry again that you've had to hear me talk through a screen rather than have me standing in front of you. Thank you very much for your time and for listening. Bye for now.